So that story that we'll look at is from Genesis 44, Genesis chapter 44. The words will be on the screen. And you can also follow in the Bibles provided in the seats and the pews. Before we read these words, let's bow our heads and hearts before God. God of mercy, you promised never to break your covenant with us. Amid all the changing words of our generation, speak that eternal word that does not change. Enable us to respond to your gracious promises with faithful and obedient lives. And all God's people said, Amen. Genesis 44. We'll be reading the entire chapter. Now Joseph, who by this time is second in command in Egypt, Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Fill the men's sacks, that is his brothers' sacks, the 11 of them, with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done. When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them, but they said to him, Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver and gold from our master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves. Very well, then, he said, let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave, and the rest of you will be free from blame. Each one of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this, they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination? What can we say to my Lord? Judah replied. What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. But Joseph said, Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who is found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back home to your father in peace. Judah went up to him and said, Please, my Lord, let your servant speak a word to my Lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servants, Do you have a father or a brother? And we answered, We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me so that I can see him for myself. And we said to my Lord, The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die. But you told your servants, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my Lord had said. Then our father said, Go back and buy a little more food. But we said, We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, He has surely been torn to pieces. And I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, And if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring down the gray head of our father to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Brothers and sisters in Christ, we are this Sunday getting back to the series we began a while ago on Jesus in the Old Testament. If you remember, we started by looking at Jesus in the prophets. We saw how the Old Testament prophets, they give us specific promises, specific predictions about the coming of Jesus. But what the prophets also do, they help us see how Jesus would come and he would meet the greatest need of God's people. The prophets point out how because of our sin, there is this gap, this distance between us and God. It's Jesus who overcomes that gap. We also looked at how we see Jesus in the Psalms. And the Psalms, there's this hope that sort of runs through many of the Psalms that God will ultimately bless his people with life, with real life. The kind of life that overcomes even death. And we saw how Jesus is the one who makes that kind of life possible. And then the last time we looked at Jesus in the Old Testament, we looked at how Jesus shows up in the law. We saw how all those rules and rituals that God gave his people back in the Old Testament, those rules and rituals were designed to help prepare them for what he was going to do when Jesus finally came. So we see Jesus appearing in the Old Testament in these different ways. But when you read through the Old Testament, what you also get are these people, these specific individuals who in their own way point us to Jesus. Well, these particular people do, the way they act, in a way, it's kind of like what Jesus himself does. You think, for instance, of someone like Moses. One of Moses' roles was to serve as mediator. He was the go-between between God and his people. Well, that is what Jesus is for us as well. He is our mediator. He is the go-between, the one who connects us to God. You can also look at someone like Joshua, who we looked at last Sunday as part of Cadet Sunday. God called Joshua to lead his people into the promised land. And when you think about it, though, that is kind of what Jesus does for us as well. He doesn't necessarily take us to Canaan, to Palestine, but he brings us into God's kingdom. And that connection between Jesus and Joshua gets even stronger when you recognize that the name Jesus is simply the Greek version of the Hebrew name Joshua. Both names mean the Lord saves. I don't think that's by accident. We're meant to see a connection between the two. And so what happens then, the way some of these Old Testament figures get used, in a way, it's a bit like reading the Chronicles of Narnia, except in reverse. If you've ever read any of those, for instance, in the one book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's the scene where Aslan, the lion, is willing to let himself be sacrificed, put to death on the stone table in order to save Edmund, one of the human characters. And most people, when they read that, they can't help but think, wait a minute, that's exactly what Jesus does for us. That's the same kind of thing. And that's kind of what these individuals in the Old Testament also do, except because they lived before Jesus was born, before his incarnation, they point us ahead. They don't point back to him. And there is a name for this, for when a person in the Old Testament is used to point us to Jesus. These individuals are said to be types of Christ. And we normally, when you hear the word type, for me anyway, what comes to mind is typing. It's what you do with a keyboard. It's actually related to the way we use the word type. That word type actually comes from another Greek word, the Greek word typos or tupos. A typos is an impression or a copy that you would make either by pressing something hard into something soft or by hammering something into another surface. So, for instance, when you took soft wax and put a seal in it, that was a typos. Or when you took metal and used it to put an image into another piece of metal, like a coin, that's a typos. In the same way, the types that we get in the Old Testament, they're kind of just copies of the real thing. They're copies of Jesus. He is the original. But these types, these impressions that we get of Jesus, they then help us understand a bit of the gospel more clearly by giving us these pictures, by giving us living illustrations, so to speak, of who Jesus is and what is it that he's done for us. You look at these folks and you realize what these particular people did. It's kind of like what Jesus did for us. The thing is, too, though, not everyone who gets used as a type of Christ in the Old Testament is necessarily automatically a nice person. It's not always the clear-cut good guys that get used as types. For instance, in the story of Joseph and his brothers, you can kind of tell pretty quickly Joseph himself, he is meant to be a type of Jesus, a type of Christ. Even though he himself doesn't realize it at the time, Joseph is sent ahead by God to Egypt so that he can save people, he can save his family, he can save God's people. What happened to Joseph back then points ahead to what Jesus does for us. But then you also get Joseph's half-brother, Judah. Joseph was one of the two sons that Jacob had with Rachel. Rachel was Jacob's true love, his beloved wife. Judah, on the other hand, Judah was number 4 of the 6 sons that Jacob had with Leah, Rachel's sister, Jacob's other wife. The first time that Judah gets mentioned in the Old Testament after his birth, the first time he's mentioned really is when the brothers decide that they've had enough of Joseph. The other brothers resent the fact that Joseph is daddy's favorite. They decide it's time to get rid of him. And Judah comes up in that story because Judah's the one who has the bright idea. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him. Let's sell him into slavery. And so the first impression we get of Judah is that he is callous, he is cold, he is calculating. You kind of get the gist. The reason he suggests selling his brother into slavery is that it's more profitable to him than murder. But then it gets worse, the picture we're given of Judah. You get to Genesis chapter 38, and there's this sordid story that takes place shortly after Joseph's mysterious disappearance. Judah opts to leave the family. He turns his back on God's covenant people, and he decides instead to live among the people of the land, among the Canaanites. He even gets married to a Canaanite woman, and he has 3 sons. And then the way these sons carry on, it's worse than the Canaanites. We're told that Judah's firstborn son, Er, is struck down by God because of his wickedness. And so Judah gives Er's wife Tamar to his second son Onan. That was part of the custom of the time. The expectation was if one brother died, then the next brother in line had the responsibility to provide an heir to keep the family line going. But then Onan is also struck down by God. And that maybe already says something about the kind of fatherly example that Judah was providing for his sons. But then Judah, we're told, has one other son left. There's 3 boys. But by this time, he's a little bit leery of letting Tamar marry his youngest son. Her first 2 husbands already died. And so Tamar decides to take matters into her own hands. She tricks Judah into spending the night with her, because Judah himself is apparently not above committing adultery once in a while. Tamar ends up getting pregnant with twins. Now, this might have you wondering, what on earth is a story like this doing in the Bible? But this story of Judah and his involvement with Tamar, it raises an even bigger question. How does someone like Judah get used to point us to Jesus? How can God include someone like that in his salvation story? Like I said, it is much easier for us to see something of Jesus in somebody like Joseph. Like Jesus, Joseph was betrayed by his own people, by his own family. Like Jesus, Joseph was falsely accused. He was abandoned. And like Jesus, Joseph still continues to trust in God. He remains obedient, faithful. And in the end, Joseph, like Jesus, he is raised up. He ends up sitting at the right hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Joseph comes to realize that God had done all this. God had sent him ahead to Egypt to save people, not just his own family, but many people from many nations. So you can see how Joseph points to Christ. Still, in that chapter we just read, Genesis 44, you realize the spotlight there isn't on Joseph. The spotlight is clearly on Judah. Judah, the one who had earlier abandoned his own family, he is now the one who steps up to try and save them. Judah ends up being the one who finally persuades Father Jacob to let the brothers go back to Egypt. There is a famine in the land at this time. If they don't go back to Egypt and buy more food, they are all going to starve. But the thing is, the brothers, they need to bring Benjamin, the youngest brother, with them. Up until now, Jacob had refused. He wouldn't do that. Benjamin was Joseph's younger brother. Benjamin was all that Jacob had left of his beloved wife, Rachel. And so you can understand why Jacob couldn't bear the thought of losing him. That it would be devastating. But Jacob's favoritism, his selfishness is now putting the rest of his family at risk. And so Judah is the one who finally persuades Jacob, you've got to let Benjamin go. Judah's the one who steps up and says to his father, send Benjamin with me, and I will guarantee his safety. If he doesn't come back, I will bear the blame for it the rest of my life. And of course, the brothers don't realize that there's more going on. They don't realize that the governor of Egypt, whom they have been dealing with, he is actually their brother Joseph. And they don't realize Joseph is engineering things behind the scenes all along. Joseph has his favorite silver cup stuffed into Benjamin's sack of grain. He does that so that he can set up the scenario where his brothers will again be forced to choose. What are they going to do? Are they going to again leave a brother behind? Are they going to do what they had done to Joseph some 20 years before? Are they going to again abandon the favorite son? Or will they stand together this time? Will they do whatever it takes this time to save their brother? And to be honest, the fact that all 11 brothers right away assume when they're confronted with this accusation that you took the cup, they assume there's no way any of us did it. That itself is an impressive thing. 20 years before, chances are one of them probably would have taken the cup, and they probably would have had no problem letting one of the other brothers take the blame for it. But when that last sack of grain is opened and the silver cup tumbles out, it turns out Benjamin has it. This time, the other 10 brothers are heartbroken. They all start rending their robes, tearing their clothes apart in grief. This is the last thing they had expected. They all know there's no way Benjamin could have done it. They actually trust him. There's no discussion about what they're going to do next. Load up your donkeys, boys. We're all going back to Egypt. The brothers know, they all instinctively know they can't go back home. They can't go back to Jacob, not without their brother. Not again. And that already then would have made quite an impression on Joseph to see all 11 of his brothers standing together with Benjamin. That already would have been a pretty big indication of just how much they had changed since the last time he'd seen them. But then Judah steps forward. Judah steps up and he speaks on the brothers' behalf. Judah admits there is no way they can prove their innocence. You notice he says their innocence, all of them, not just Benjamin's. But then Judah also goes on to admit, without actually saying it, that even though they didn't take the governor's cup, 10 of them are still guilty. In what Judah says, there is an admission, an implicit admission that what is happening to them now, they had this coming. Deep down, they all know they deserve this because of what they had done to Joseph. But Joseph again forces them to make a choice. Joseph gives them a way out if they're willing to take it. He makes clear he's only interested in keeping the one who stole the cup. He's only interested in going after Benjamin. The rest of them, the other 10 brothers, they're all free to go back to their father Jacob, just like they had before. This time, they could even tell Jacob the truth. Benjamin messed up. He got caught. There was nothing we could do. Judah refuses to take the easy way out. Not this time. Judah has seen what his brother's deception has done. He's seen how much their jealousy and hatred have cost their family. Every day for the past 20 years, they've had to live with it. They've seen the pain their sin has caused their father. The way that Jacob played favorites, that wasn't fair. That wasn't right either. But what the brothers had done, what they had done to Joseph, it made it virtually impossible for them to get past it, to move forward, to find any kind of healing as a family. And so without realizing who he is really speaking to, Joseph proceeds to tell the governor of Egypt just how much the apparent death of Joseph has cost them. Judah explains how hard, how difficult it has been for Jacob to let Benjamin go with them. Judah explains how it would destroy their father if Benjamin does not come back with them. I would almost imagine at this point in the story, Judah maybe even pauses. He maybe takes a moment to glance back at Benjamin, at the other 10 brothers. Hey, it's going to be okay. This time, we are going to do whatever it takes to make this right. Judah especially, he is determined to do whatever he can to undo the damage he's caused. He turns back to the governor, to Joseph, and says what should have been said some 20 years earlier. Judah turns to the governor and says, you cannot keep him. His father loves him so much, it would devastate him. Even though Jacob's love for Benjamin, his favoritism, isn't fair, it isn't right. That through all he's been through, Judah has come to love his father. He's come to love his brother too much for that to matter now. And so, what love does, love, loyalty, devotion, covenant, commitment. Love compels Judah to say to the governor, If someone has to stay, if someone has to be left behind to make this right, then let it be me. Take me instead of Benjamin. Take me, because there is no way I could ever go back to my father and see what it would do to him if I came back without the boy. Let me do this for him. Now, what we get with Judah, it is not a perfect analogy. It's not a totally perfect picture of everything that God has done for us in Christ. That's how most types end up working. Excuse me. Judah himself, as we saw, he is far from perfect. He is definitely not the most likable character, especially at first. But Judah changes, or rather, he is changed, which is in itself a powerful picture of what God does in the lives of his people. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, God is making us more and more Christ-like. But then you also look at the situation that Judah found himself in. It isn't exactly totally the same as what happened with Christ. The brothers probably suspected that this whole thing with the silver cup was a setup. Despite what the governor said, they all knew they had done some pretty terrible stuff, but they also knew Benjamin was innocent. And that's not quite the same as what happened with Jesus and us. When we stand before God, we also know he has every right to judge us. God has every reason to declare us guilty and punish us because we are guilty. We are all guilty of sin. But unlike Judah, when Jesus stepped forward to take our place, he was truly innocent. He was without sin. But still, what someone like Judah helps us to see, there is sometimes this temptation to see that what Jesus did for us when he took our place, some people see that as an example to them of what they call cosmic child abuse. In their view, what happened is that God the Father, he's fuming angry at us for our sin. He's ready to let us have it. But then big brother Jesus steps in and says, if you want to smite someone, then smite me. Unfortunately, I've talked with people who that is how they understand what happened when Jesus took our place. That's something they've experienced for themselves in abusive situations, and they have trouble seeing how there could have been something else going on really when Jesus took our place. The reality is what Judah does. He helps us to see how love, not anger, but love is at the heart and center of what the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have done to make salvation possible. And this might not be the best way to put it, but it's kind of like at some point in eternity, God the Son approached God the Father knowing that we would fall into sin and otherwise end up lost. We miss them that much. They're hurting that much. And let me do this, Father. Let me take their place. Let me do this so that we can have them back. Judah was somehow able to love his father. He was somehow able to start loving his brothers, even though their love for him was not perfect. It was flawed. It was selfish. But in what Judah does, we still get this picture, this impression of the kind of great love God has for us. A love that is so deep, so powerful, so perfect, that God was willing to let his own Son come to us and become one of us so that he could take our place, so that he could have us back. What happens to Judah? The way that he changes, the way that he's willing to give himself up to save his own brother, it also points us to Jesus because it's a picture of what we should see the Holy Spirit doing in each of us. That's the kind of thing we should be seeing in ourselves more and more, that same willingness to lay ourselves down, to set aside our rights, our preferences. Especially right now, that is important. If we really believe that Jesus died in our place, that out of love, he took upon himself the punishment we deserved, that should come out of us too, as love for him, but also love that spills out into the lives of those around us. Amen. Let's pray. Lord God, our Father in heaven, we recognize, we admit that our love, like Jacob's, our love is imperfect. It's flawed. We also tend to play favorites. We don't love others equally well as we ought. Help us like you did with Judah to change. Help us to be changed by your Spirit so that we become more and more like Christ. Fill us with a love like Christ, a love that is willing to give, to sacrifice, to lay itself down. Fill us with a love that puts you and what you want first. And all of God's people said, Amen.